Good evening and welcome to Skeptics in the Pub Online. I'm Kat from the Merseyside Skeptics Society and I'll be your host for the evening. If you're joining us for the first time, Skeptics in the Pub Online is a coalition of various skeptics in the pub groups from across the UK and Europe. We came together when the COVID pandemic meant that we couldn't have our monthly meetings in pubs, so now we host weekly talks online on a variety of topics that promote science, reason and critical thinking. For information about future events, please find us on Facebook or Twitter or check out our website, SitP.online. The format for tonight is we will have our talk from our excellent guest speaker, then we will take a short break followed by a question and answer session. If you'd like to join in the Q&A, please go to sitp.online/ask to submit your questions or upvote questions that you'd like to see asked. Our lovely moderators will be dropping that link into the chat bar along with other useful links throughout the night. After the Q&A, we will be opening our virtual pub, the Lock-ins Razor, where you're welcome to join us for a chat and a drink of your choice. Tonight is our International Women's Day talk. We are joined by Professor Maryanne Fisher. Maryanne Fisher is an evolutionary psychologist at St Mary's University in Halifax, Canada, and an affiliate faculty member at the Kinsey Institute. She has studied mating and dating for years, and especially the competition between women for access to those they desire. And some of her research is devoted to exploring the intersection between feminist studies and evolutionary psychology. She is a highly published and cited academic and is the author of A Very Short Introduction to Evolutionary Psychology, which is due to be released later this year. After more than 2 decades of research, she has arrived at the conclusion that women are not passive agents in the mating market, but are instead very strategic. Tonight, she will be talking to us about her research on motherhood, the evidence against the existence of a default maternal instinct, and the harms that myths around motherhood can cause. Now, due to the nature of the topic of tonight's talk, there will be some discussion of child abuse and infanticide. Now, this talk will be available on YouTube at a later date, so if you feel you would rather not watch this talk now, it will be available to watch at your discretion. But for now, please fill the chat with applause and welcome to the screen, Professor Maryanne Fisher.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's honestly an honor to be here with you all. I've called this talk originally Mummy Dearest to reference and draw attention to a movie from 1981. And that movie was by the same name. It was a biographical drama, and it starred the story of Christina Crawford's adoptive mother, Joan Crawford. And what the story really was about was how Joan Crawford was an abusive and manipulative mother, according to her daughter, Christina, and that she hurt her adoptive children. And what's funny about that to me is that the film was a very big commercial success. It actually grossed about $39 million worldwide, and it only had a $5 million budget. So it did quite well, profiting on mistreatment of adopted children, which is sad. But it received rather negative reviews from critics. And they said that the script was bizarre and the acting wasn't great, especially by Faye Dunaway. But it became a cult classic, and it was considered to be a bit of an unintentional comedy. So the talk being framed about Mummy Dearest is done quite carefully, because when we think about maternal instinct, we might think of it as being a rather flippant topic or not all that important, but it is extremely important. So without further ado, I'd like to discuss that with you. I'm going to begin by reviewing the revolutionary idea that women are strategists. And I'm hoping that this is not really a surprise to most of you, but women's behavior from an evolutionary stance is adaptive. And it typically shows flexibility that matches a situation to the best it can. And the idea is that by adapting to a situation, women are basically increasing their individual fitness. So they're increasing the likelihood of their own survival, they're increasing their reproductive success, and so on. And the backbone of evolutionary theorizing is that individuals, including mothers, are striving to increase their individual fitness. Well, let's talk about how that occurs. The cornerstone is really about flexible decision-making, and it's about trying to make decisions that are somehow contingent on an ecological situation. Where I've been spending my time is really looking at a particular decision-making paradigm of when to cooperate versus when to compete as a woman. And most of my work has been framed within mating, as Kat pointed out, but I've also been looking at things like, just in general, when do you share or when do you hoard limited resources? When do you engage in allo-parenting or shared childcare versus just look after your own children? And then, of course, what to do with mates. Well, I began looking at mothering a while ago, and I started putting out some papers with my colleagues, some of whom have actually helped with the direction of this research I'm presenting tonight. But we started publishing about when women are engaging in cooperative versus competitive mothering, at least in theoretical terms. And we had some success in doing that. We got to some of the nuances, and it kept building and building as a model. And that was lovely. Theory is great, right? But it didn't get to an experiment. We couldn't figure out, how do you measure objectively cooperative versus competitive mothering? Is it time? Is it energy? Is it amount of money you spend? Like, how do you actually numerically put in place an equal ruler for those two different types of behavior? So what we did was we adopted the work that we had done on mating competition in terms of the strategies that women use to secure mates and retain mates, and pushed it over to mothering. So we began looking at how mothers are perceived when they self-promote versus when they derogate other mothers. So that's where the research really stopped in terms of competitive mothering to date. We've begun doing some more follow-up experiments, but that's where it got to. But then what happened was I began thinking about this idea of women as strategists in terms of what people believe them able to do, which led me to this very important question, which is, how does the idea of women as strategists really fit with the idea of a maternal instinct? Like, how can we see women as being strategists on one side and yet being driven somehow by this innate biological need or behavior on the other? It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Well, it turns out I'm probably in good hands here, because the theory of evolutionary psychology, a lot of the theories of evolutionary psychology, would lead one to maybe believe in a maternal instinct or support the idea of a maternal instinct. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this talk into two parts. And the first part is going to be how you might view evolutionary psychology theorizing to lead to maternal instinct, and how if you're a student in evolutionary psychology, how you might come to see that as being accurate. And then we're going to have this weird tension in the middle, and then I'm going to turn to evidence against maternal instinct. Okay, so let's begin. One of the cornerstones of evolutionary psychology is what we call parental investment theory. This was a theory developed by Bob Trivers based on the work of A.J. Bateman in the 40s and 50s. And it has been used within the context of humans, but of course it applies much beyond that. So this is the idea that, well, women more than men parentally invest because, for example, they have larger gametes. They have a 9-month gestation, give or take if they're lucky. There's lactation involved, which involves a huge metabolic cost for women. And then women often engage in postnatal childcare. So the idea of parental investment theory, or how it's being used in the field at least, is that women must really try to protect that investment. And of course, that's a bit problematic when you start thinking about, well, what if it wasn't a good investment to begin with? And that's the second half of the talk. Okay, so let's say you've learned about parental investment theory and you're thinking, okay, women really do make these investments. They're very heavy. It's a very costly situation to have a child, whereas your male counterpart might be engaging in different types of more quantity-driven behavior. You're really focusing on a few children, for example. So the idea is that, well, it'd be sensible that there might be an instinct that somehow drives this maternal behavior, or maybe even leads women to really wanting to have children. There might be something even deeper about the necessity of wanting children, and that tying into simply being automatically able to care for children. So mothers, via maternal instinct, maybe automatically know how to meet the demands of an infant, to protect their infants at all costs, to show others how to best provide care, be able to use social support effectively, all for the purposes of promoting child survival. So that seems, potentially feasible. And we know, for example, that it really is not an exaggeration to say that the most essential mammalian relationship is really between mothers and offspring. And even for pair bonding humans where fathers could and often do contribute paternal care, mothers typically contribute far more. So it's really mothers investing in that childcare, and that's a universal behavior. We also know that based on infant mortality rates in hunter-gatherer groups, that infants, if the mother passes away before the infant turns 2, the infant has a much higher chance of also passing away. And in terms of numbers, if you like numbers, this isn't a hunter-gatherer group per se, but in rural Ethiopia, there was this fantastic study that was longitudinally done between 1987 and 2011, and they found that 81% of infants died when their mothers had passed away within 42 days of birth, which is an extraordinary number. So I think that alone should convince us that there's something about this bond between mothers and their children that's extremely essential. But there are other arguments we could consider. So, for example, there's just been this line of argument that, well, women have evolved adaptations to increase the odds of their children surviving, such that maybe even recognizing facial expressions is one of those adaptations. I'm not a big fan of this study because I find the reasoning quite circular, but I wanted to cover it anyway. And that is that, well, the sex that has dominated infant caretaking over human evolution may exhibit the most caretaking skills. That's the core concept of a lot of the primary caretaker hypothesis argument. So then, the argument goes on to say, well, women's ability to quickly and accurately recognize infant emotional expressions, which the literature has documented, must be somehow providing evidence of women's evolutionary history of caretaking. And I just find that really circular. It doesn't really get to the gist of it, right? It doesn't really get to the really central core concept. So it's a bit problematic. But let's continue on. So let's say you're buying all this so far, and you're at the point where you're talking about how women are more interested in children. So we know, for example, that women, more than men, have a preference for viewing photos of infants. If you just go to a social setting and people start whipping out photographs, it's usually women asking to see pictures or expressing more interest in pictures in infants of others. We also know that interest in infants that females or women displays often begins to peak in adolescence and stays rather high. And the argument is that, well, maybe this is facilitating the acquisition of parenting skills through observation or trial and error alloparenting, but it's basically getting women interested in parenting. And the argument has been, well, maybe it's indicating that there's a maternal cognition that's attuned to infant care that has an evolutionary connection. What this does not suggest to me, however, is a maternal instinct. And it's not that a maternal instinct is what's going to make a woman a highly capable mother. Instead, it's really highlighting the role of experience and learning and mastering mothering skills. So let's think about this for a second. If I was to say to you that humans' parental behavior is really a complex interactions of genes with the environment, you'd probably go, of course it is. But if I said to you that mother's parenting behavior is a complex interaction of genes with the environment, you might pause more for a few minutes and think about that. Because we seem to have this very widespread belief that mothers possess superior parenting skills than fathers, or that somehow women as mothers are more capable as parents. We don't think of mothering as being this interaction between genes and the environment. We also, as at least a society where I am, have this enduring perpetuation of what it means to be a good mother. And it's really hard to meet that standard, right? So in today's society, being a good mother means to be completely, exhaustingly devoted to your children, to be self-sacrificing, to know the best way to raise and educate your children. And all of these things are really hand in glove with the idea of a maternal instinct. And you can see I feel very passionate about this. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, which are my greatest accomplishment to date, quite truthfully, and my greatest adventure, but also my most exhausting enterprise. So let's think about popular culture, right? And I always think it's interesting when we think about how society at large thinks about a concept that we use in science, or when we look at how people just generally refer to a behavior. And maternal instinct, as defined by the Collins Dictionary, is something along the lines of the natural tendency that a mother has to behave or react in a particular way around her child or children. So it's this idea of a natural tendency. And I understand that the dictionary is not going to pass a value judgment on the definition or on the idea, the core idea. Still a bit problematic, though. But I'll show you something that is disturbing. So the New York Times, I just was trying to find some research about the popular consensus about maternal instinct and stumbled upon this one. So the New York Times, this is several years ago now, I believe it's 2008, they were reviewing a study that was about how mothers, when they were put into fMRI machines, when different parts of their brain were activated in response to seeing their babies smiling, but more than anything, when they were crying compared to seeing unrelated babies. And the authors of the research referred to this in the context of maternal love, and they were very careful in how they framed their research as maternal love. They didn't talk about it as an instinct, as a root cause. But the New York Times, rather than frame it in terms of maternal love, which would have had a lot more scientific merit, decided to sort of wash it over and cover it up as the maternal instinct. And this is really problematic, of course, because huge readership, popular belief, people are going to see that and they're going to go, oh, okay, there must be such a thing as a maternal instinct because now the New York Times is saying it's wired into women's brains. So let's think about this for a second. I proposed at the beginning that women are strategists. Not a surprise, but let's dig a little bit deeper into what I mean by that. I'm arguing that women are evolved beings who have a long history of making decisions to maximize the likelihood of their genes surviving and reproducing in subsequent generations. That women are constantly striving to maximize their individual fitness and reproductive success. I am not saying that these are conscious behaviors. I'm not saying that women have a deep set awareness that they're doing things that have this optimal maximizing strategy logic to them. But evolutionary psychology has been very informative at showing that women and men behave in ways that make evolutionary sense. Okay, so that's what I'm proposing here when I say women are strategists, is that women are behaving in these very particular ways. I'm going to then say that mothers are strategists. I should point out I'm not reducing all women to mothers. I value mothering myself as a mother, but I also wanted to point out that I am aware that women's potential far exceeds one role. Okay. But I do think we have to reconceptualize how we view mothering as a field in evolutionary psychology and also as people in the general community. So this is where you get the so-called trigger warning. So I'm going to talk about some of the negative mothering behaviors. So just wanted to put that back out there. But how are women strategists? Well, women engage in lots of very strategic behaviors. Pregnant women engage in abortions that are informed. They engage in child abandonment. Mothers engage in neglect that leads to death of the child. And mothers, of course, also engage in intentional infanticide. And I'll expand on each of these points in just a minute. What's interesting is when you look at these behaviors in terms of the women's context or mother's context, because they're not engaging in these behaviors without a lot of flexible decision-making being present. So they're engaging these sorts of behaviors often when they simply do not have the resources and or support to adequately care for those children, or when that current child or children is going to reduce the chances in the future of having children that especially will survive and reproduce, given that they have a better context around them. So if a maternal instinct then was part of women's evolutionary history, how would they be able to engage in these behaviors, and how in the world are they going to maximize their fitness? So I'm going to argue that a maternal instinct is an invention. Okay, I have to shift gears here slightly because I'm going to promote an old book that you can probably find used almost anywhere, and it is this book, and it's called Mother Love by Elizabeth Batner, The Myth and Reality. And the reason I'm putting that out there is, first of all, it has an interesting history you can look up, but it really was an informative look at how our ideas about mothering have shifted over the centuries. So it's an old book, 1981. But what was interesting was that she proposes a very coherent line of argument that, for example, in the 17th and 18th century in France, children were often seen as a nuisance, right? So it went from, there's this idea of being pest to precious. So children were often seen as rather pesty and annoying and just a nuisance that you had to put up with. now we view children as precious. In the 17th and 18th century, we have high child deaths. We have a lack of mourning often surrounding those deaths, and children are often treated very unequally within one family even. So you might treat the elder children better than the younger children, or vice versa, or you might treat sons more fully than daughters in a positive way, and so on. By the end of the 18th century in France, the idea of mother love surfaces, and she connects it to the French state's need for more citizens via an increase in the birth rate. So how do you get, at a country level, women to start having more children? And what she argues is that, well, men in positions of influence and power, such as writers, politicians, government administrators, and doctors, and so on, were pushing women to have more children to therefore have a population increase. And how they did it was ingenious, because they used nature to justify it. So they were saying that there was a maternal instinct that women had, and that this was used to justify and cement social conventions surrounding the role of women and the sexual division of labor in French history. And what we do see is a dramatic shift into the 19th century French writings that indicate women as maternal, and that engaging in mothering is seen as natural and destiny, whereas we do not see that previously. And indeed, representations of women were dramatically altered, with some scholars even using models of insects to demonstrate the existence of maternal instincts among biological beings. Not quite sure how they did that. I'm still trying to track that one down more fully. But it's really interesting how we see this socio-cultural shift in a concept. We don't often have that luxury. So that was the odd tension in the middle. And where I'm going to turn to now is evidence against a maternal instinct. So there are really three lines of evidence I'd like to put forward to you. And I'm going to spend a few minutes on each of these without a lot of slides. So you're going to hear me talking for a few minutes. I kept expanding to the literature to try to persuade you that these were reasons that women are being seen in a way that's not conducive when you think about a maternal instinct. So one of the primary underpinnings of a maternal instinct would be that, well, women would automatically have this ability to feed their young, right? That mothers are able to care for their children via breastfeeding, the most primary thing to do to keep your child alive. Well, that is true, except that, of course, many women encounter difficulties in trying to breastfeed. And most women believe that breast is best, and mothers are really encouraged by public health officials to engage in breastfeeding. But there's difficulties. The Leleche League, the International Leleche League, would not exist if breastfeeding was natural and automatic and easy for women to engage in. So that's one aspect of breastfeeding. The other aspect, of course, is wet nurses. So while modern views of breastfeeding are positive and seen as being part of what mothers should do, and I hate the word should, especially in the context of parenting, but should do, what we see is that, in French history, 18th century, especially around then, it was really common for wealthy women to employ wet nurses. And these would be often peasants or lower income class women that were basically paid to breastfeed their young. And over into the 19th century, we begin to see it become common even among the lower income classes. Well, what happens to the children of the wet nurses? Many of them perish. And so we see very large rates of infant death. There was no controls. There's no government regime to oversee the whole project or enterprise. And we have high infant mortality. Things are really falling apart. Well, what happens is World War I. And we have sudden unemployment of married women and poor resources for married women, coupled with government campaigns to end wet nursing. And so it declined to the point where it doesn't exist. So breastfeeding, if it was automatic or part of mother's natural repertoire that they could engage in with ease, then of course we would have a much different situation. We also have the issue of infanticide and abandonment. So the plausibility of maternal instinct is really reduced when one considers rates of intentional killing of one's infants and children. Of course, infanticide rates vary substantially. They're usually underreported, at least we think. They're notoriously problematic from a reporting point of view. But we also know that maternal infanticide is cross-cultural. And there's one particularly disturbing study It was by Abrams and colleagues in 2016. And what they reported was that in the previous year, 2015, 5.9 million children died before they turned the age of 5, which is about 43 of every 1,000 children born alive. And approximately 75% of all of those live births were, all those deaths rather, were infants. So they were less than 1 year of age. And they outline how infanticide can be active and involve deliberate acts of killing, for example, or they can be passive, such as via neglect and so on. But most deaths that they documented were resulting from abandonment by mothers. So if there's maternal instinct, why would we see these things existing? And the last example, and I know this is a really morbid and heavy and deep, so bear with me, we're almost done. But a final example, and this one's a bit contentious because it depends on how you interpret things. But Wolf 2003 provided evidence that there was a practice in northern Taiwan between 1906 and 1930, that was when it was documented, where mothers would so-called willingly, and that's the part that's questioned, willingly give away their daughters as infants or small children to their future husbands' families. So these girls were in a situation where their husband was already selected and they'd be moved out to his house. And this was not a rare practice. So 69% of about 6,200 females born between those years in northern Taiwan were given away as infants or young children by their mothers for marriage purposes. And what he documented was that women reported that they'd given away their own daughters to make room for their son's future wife. So to make room in their household for this new girl to come on. So it's like everyone shifts a little bit to the left, if you catch my drift there. So now they have this girl entering their house who's unrelated, but basically by shaping her and encouraging her to listen and be a part of the new family, it would be a way of having a more amicable marriage. And we can get into discussions about why this was a failing practice in terms of incest avoidance and things like that, but it existed for a long time. It also allowed families to avoid paying dowries, bride prices, and having to deal with arranged marriages, and so on. But if you had an instinct as a mother to keep your children close and to look after them, why would you so-called willingly, if it is willingly, give your daughters away? So I feel it's important to make a distinction at this point between maternal instinct and maternal love, two vastly different concepts. I'm trying to argue that maternal instinct is a myth, that it's problematic, and it's something that we should get rid of, essentially. And I'm going to argue in favor of maternal love as a concept. Okay, so maternal love. The fabulous Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy, I say that no jest, she's an incredible scholar. If you have not read Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy's work, you absolutely must. And she outlined in 1999 this idea of maternal love being something like a mother's emotional commitment to her infant. And she argues that it's highly contingent on ecological and historical circumstances. But she also argues that a young mother, how a young mother treats her child currently, really serves as a poor predictor of how she may treat another child when she's older or when she's facing improved circumstances. So a mother who's facing bleak circumstances currently, who's encumbered by an infant, may be decreasing all her chances at future reproductive success or even her individual survival. So she may opt to abandon her infant to increase her success later on. So this is viewing women in a very active way. It's viewing mothers as being very strategic in terms of promoting their own reproductive careers and survival. So where this gets us to is a point about flexibility and mothering behavior. Mothers have to be flexible. They have to be flexible decision makers. They have to show judgment. They have to think about their ecological situations. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. So at risk in this context refers to children who would be at risk of being neglected, abandoned, or maltreated. And when I talk about poor mothers, it was just a way to make it more concise. But I'm talking specifically here about mothers who are in a situation of low income or facing life below the poverty line or in some sort of disadvantaged situation economically. And to show us that mothering is ecologically dependent, we know that care of at-risk children is moderated by mother's resources. So when a mother has a low level of resources available to her, what I'm calling here poor mothers, They are mothers that often do not invest fully in their children, whereas affluent mothers, mothers with a lot more resources available, tend to invest more. And that might be time, that might be finances, that might be buying more food, all sorts of different ways we can look at that. More compelling evidence to me comes from twin studies. So in situations where there are twins and one is healthier than the other, mothers in a weaker economic situation often invest in the healthy twin, whereas affluent mothers tend to invest more heavily in the at-risk twin. And then in general, regardless of how at risk an infant is, mothers with low resources, whether this be in terms of economic prospects or actual money or income or support from others by monetary gains, those mothers with low resources are more likely to abuse, neglect, and or kill their infants. Okay, so I'm arguing that women and mothers, particularly in this context, are strategists all the time. Mothers must make the most of their available resources while trying to navigate their own needs because they're trying to increase their own individual survival. They're also trying to maximize the needs of their current children, perhaps, as well as consider the needs of their future children. So they're making decisions for many different individuals along the way here, and they're doing so via the use of strategy. But we can't look at mothers as being an isolated part of this equation. We have to think about who else might be giving support to mothers and how resources might be distributed. So if care from others is limited or resources from others is reduced and the mothers are put in a position where they feel very isolated, they're not receiving help from others, they don't have adequate resources, then it may cause mothers to, it may harm other mothers' ability to form emotional attachments to their current and then future children. That situation of emotional connection is variable. It is not fixed. We can't view it as being automatic because women's situations are always changing. Mother situations are constantly changing. So that was the evidence for that weird tension between and then against. And I then was curious about whether or not this was an idea that current students believed in. Is it the case that this is a debate amongst the academic world? We're talking about theory, we're talking about ecological situation. How does a student, as a young adult, view maternal instincts? And so we asked simply, how prevalent is this belief? Like, have you heard of it? Yes or no? And then how would you define maternal instinct? Now, we were careful about where we collected our sample. Again, this is just a quick study. It was designed to be something that would provide us a bit of context about whether people still believe in a maternal instinct. And so we had a sample of 206 students. These were volunteers from upstate New York in the United States, Toronto and Halifax in Canada. These schools were carefully selected for a variety of reasons I'll talk about in 1 minute. They completed the 2 questions. And then of that, I should mention that 16 participants had not heard of maternal instinct, so they weren't included in the rest of our study. But the final sample was of 190 students, the majority of whom were women. Now, the reason these 3 locations were chosen was because these schools were all roughly the same size. So I would say they're more like a liberal arts college university, but they have a very big international student base. And so by asking this student base about these core concepts, you might get a bit more of a generalizable finding. But also these 3 schools are schools that have been including evolutionary psychology for 10 years or more as part of the standard undergraduate curriculum. And so these were students I was personally hoping were going to say, oh my goodness, I know about the maternal instinct and no, it's problematic, or have an interesting view about it. So the questions we asked were simply, have you ever heard of maternal instinct, yes or no? And if so, what do you think maternal instinct means? And then we went through a rather elaborate coding process with qualitative data. We had 2 coders make up the code book, one who was aware of the study, one who was not. And then they had to reconcile. And then we had 5 blind coders, meaning that they were blind to the study's goals and hypotheses and so on. And they used that book to code the data. And that's going to show through when you see the actual codings because they're not all based in evolutionary psychology, of course. Okay, so I'm going to give you some of the findings. And as I said, I was really hoping the students would be like, oh my goodness, in evolutionary psychology, we talk about blah, 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 blah. And I should have really reined in my expectations. So first of all, remember we have 190 participants. 23% of them specifically used a word or more than one word that indicated it's somehow innate to being a mother. So they're using words like nature, involuntary, innate, genetic, intrinsic, inherent, or automatic. That was really shocking to me. We didn't have a hypothesis surrounding that, but we noticed it, we kept track of it because it's really telling that there's this belief that maternal instinct, remember this is open-ended. So this isn't us saying, how do you define it in terms of biology? These are people automatically putting it as part of their definition, right? So that's really telling. Now we had 14 themes. The little orange arrows are indicating when a theme had 10% roughly of participants bringing that up in their open-ended response. So of course, when you define, like how you define a maternal instinct, you might fall into one or more of these themes. So the numbers don't have to add up to 100. But the most prevalent themes were the first few. So theme 1 was a mother's ability to just know. So the first thing was just in general. So they know about her child. The mother knows by intuition about her child, or she has these gut feelings. And that was about 20% of participants. Or a mother's ability to just know what to do to care for her baby. And that was about 12%. Or a mother's ability just to know when her baby's off, or is hurt, or is in danger, or is in general not right. The second theme was the bond between mother and baby, and that was about 23% of participants who highlighted that. Theme 3 was about mother's protection of a baby, just in general terms, about 12%. Theme 4 was mother-like behavior that's extended towards others, so taking care of others like a sick friend, that was about 8%. Theme 5 was mothering as learned behavior, so just replicating the behavior of one's own mother. Theme 6, just generic explanations of a mother. So mother taking care of a baby, that's maternal instinct. As I said, this was qualitative open-ended coding with high levels of agreement. So we didn't, there wasn't necessarily an a priori hypothesis about all of these themes. Theme 7, biological explanations specifically listed. So gut feelings, intuitions, a sixth sense, internal drive. Theme 8 was really the circular open-ended explanation. So what is maternal instinct? Well, it's a mother instinct, or it comes with being a mother. Theme 9 we did not expect, and that was not woman-specific. So it was talking about parenting rather than mothering or someone who loves a child. And I will point out that at the bottom of that list for Theme 9, mentions of father or paternal instinct 1.74%. Not a big number, of course, but still it hit the table. And then Theme 10 was a desire for having a child. Theme 11, maternal instincts is acquired. So is it during birth that you suddenly, you have these instincts? Or is it during pregnancy? Or is it during motherhood? Mothering is compulsory behavior. So there's somehow this need to care for others. Theme 13, mother specific. So it's a mother's ability to care for her child in a way that no one else can do. And number 14 was reference of other species. So talking about how non-human species also possess maternal instinct. So interesting, right? But not one participant said that they knew what it was, but that was a flawed idea or somehow incorrect. Not one participant said that it was limiting towards women or limiting towards men or reduced the role of men or women, or that it was a cause for concern. They just defined it, left it there. And that's really worrisome. Now, you might be saying, why is this so important to have devoted all this theoretical work toward it and an experiment or study rather towards it? Why is it so important? Well, I'm going to give you 5 reasons, but I'm just going to pause here for a second. When I started thinking about having children, and I was what they call a geriatric mother, because I was over 30 when I started having children in Canada. It was a really my reproductive career was a challenging one. But regardless, I remember my sister saying to me, "Oh, thank goodness you're going to be the one that has the children, because I don't have a maternal instinct at all." And I love my sister; I adore her. But I remember looking at her and going, "Holy Hannah, I don't have a maternal instinct. I haven't been around children. I'm an academic that works in my office, very long hours normally. I don't think I've ever held a baby, at least not willingly. I look at children like they're aliens. Like I don't have a maternal instinct. How am I possibly going to become a mom if that means you have to have a maternal instinct? And it really bothered me. And the whole time I was pregnant with my sons, I kept going through my head, this maternal instinct. When is it going to happen? I keep waiting. So I'm going to give you 5 reasons why I'm here to talk to you about this today, why I'm so passionate about this. The first reason, these aren't in any particular order, but the first reason is that women who do not have children are perceived to be void of a maternal instinct and hence defective or broken. I'm an evolutionary psychologist, and as such, I view reproduction as being part of women's history. And it's the case that when women don't have children in naturally fertile populations, that there may be something at a hormonal level or other things going on. But to say that making a choice makes you defective is really problematic. And to assume that someone is broken because they made a particular choice is problematic. And then to say that, well, maybe you just don't have an instinct that other women have, that can't be the culprit, right? So it just is really concerning that we view women in this light. A second reason is because it enables men to remove themselves from responsibilities associated with parenting. And so this is the idea that, oh, well, she knows how to do it because she's the mother. She has maternal instincts. I don't need to know how to do these things, and therefore I won't. And that's really limiting. And that can be something that becomes a cycle that perpetuates. Oh, my goodness. No, my dad didn't do that. I don't have to do that. And it really is about the removal of a partnership at the same time, right? Because you're abandoning your partner then by saying, well, then she should just know how to do it because she's the mother. Reason 3, a maternal instinct with no similar partnered paternal instinct, it does devalue men who parent their children because it's viewing them as being unusual in some way or maybe less masculine. And of course, in our society, we have very prescribed gender rules about masculinity and femininity and how that translates to being male and female and what's appropriate and not appropriate. And we really still devalue men who do not appear in a very masculine way, at least in Canada. And so if we talk about men who parent and men who want to parent, like stay-at-home dads, for example, they're often victim a lot of social ridicule and other things. So it's really devaluing men who engage more fully in their parenting. Reason number 4, and I think this is probably the most problematic one from where I stand, is it's really stigmatizing mothers who seek assistance with parenting skills or to help raise healthy children because, well, she should just know how to do it, right? So if they seek help, it's like she has to do it in private. She has to do it quietly so no one will know that, oh my goodness, she needs help. And there's a huge reluctance among mothers, especially first-time mothers or young mothers, to actually go and get help. And I think this is really why. And the 5th reason is, contemporary notions of what constitutes good mothering are horrible. They're terrible. And if many people believe in a maternal instinct, then maybe they'll view conditional care that's given towards the children is not really seen based on circumstance, but rather a flaw of the actual mother. Well, the reason the mom's doing that thing that she's doing that certain way is because she's a bad mom, right? And instead, if we view it as more about her ecological condition, her lack of support, her limited resources are leading to that consequence, then we might view mothering as something that's not so much about good or bad, but we might actually try to help. So this is my feel-good moment. This is my tying it all together. If people perceived mothers as free agents, capable of mother love in given circumstances, rather than automatons that are born with an instinct, evaluations of mothering behavior simply might be more generous, right? We might be more willing to help. We might view other moms and say, kudos to you, your kids are still alive. I've been trying to develop this trend where when my friends have a child that turns 1, you give the child a gift, but you give the mother some sort of luxury gift because she's managed to do it, right? That child made it to 1 and she hasn't gone completely insane. So hopefully you keep that tradition alive. Okay. So I don't want to end this with you thinking that this is some brilliant revelation or that we're the only ones saying this. We are not. We're definitely not the first, but I truly hope that we're not the last to talk about this. And, the fact that my own students still seem to believe in a maternal instinct, my family still believes in it. I talk about this to anyone that's willing to listen because it's a problem. But we really have to listen to some of the work that's done by Sarah Hrdy and others, where they talk about how, for example, there is no one root source of emotion or urge equivalent to the maternal instinct. Rather, there is a range of biologically based maternal responses to a range of circumstances that, taken together, make it more or less likely that a given mother will become committed to her offspring. So in closing, I will say what I should have probably said at the very beginning and could have saved us all a lot of time. We just need to end the myth of maternal instinct. We need to get rid of it. So before I go away, I just want to say thank you. First of all, thank you to my two lovely boys who are fantastic and who I express a ton of maternal love to. But I also need to thank my great collaborators, Doctors Rebecca Birch, Rosemary Sokol-Chang, and Catherine Salmon. We have a manuscript that we're putting together that's the basis for this talk. And I need to thank my students and all of our coders as well. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that excellent talk. We're now going to have a 15-minute break so everyone can refresh their glasses. During the break, don't forget to submit your questions for Maryanne by going to sitp.online/ask, or you can upvote any questions that have already been asked that you'd like to see asked. So we'll take a 15-minute break and see you back here for the Q&A at 8:05 GMT. Welcome back. I hope you're all feeling refreshed and ready for the Q&A. So I'm going to start with a question that we've got in from Nadia, who asks, what is your overall view of instincts in humans? Do we have them? And also, what exactly is an instinct? Is it the same as an intuition?
Those are good questions. So when I think about instinct, I'm doing it in terms of the backdrop of William James. So William James, this very powerful figure in the history of psychology, contemporary that knew about Darwin's work, and a philosopher / psychologist. And when he was thinking about instinct, he was thinking about it in a very firm manner that was biologically based, that individuals would all possess it, those sorts of attributes. The problem, I'm going to talk about why I have a problem with the idea of instinct in general, and then talk about it in terms of intuitions. So when we start talking about instincts, how many instincts does a human actually have, right? How is an instinct different than a reflex? How is it that we can engage in behaviors and say they're instinctive, and yet someone should have an instinct and just doesn't? Is it a missing gene, or is it that there was a lack of experience that caused it to be expressed? It's scientifically imprecise, right? So how do you define it? And again, how do you separate it out from other core concepts like reflex? It's also giving a label to something without explaining what it is, right? So when we say, oh, that's just a maternal instinct that's causing that, we're not explaining how that is, right? We're not explaining why it is or what it is actually. So, there's all these other issues that tie into what we think of as instinct to begin with. So when I teach, and I know this is a very different context, but when I teach, we actually cover part of the curriculum about why instinct is a word that we should not use when we talk about evolutionary adaptations. And it's because of all that background. Now, intuition is a very similar concept, right? Because I actually went and looked up the word intuition, and I got it stuck to my computer here. So this is just dictionary.com, which I know is not the most reputable source. However, it defines it as the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. I'll come back to that definition in 1 second. Also says it's a thing that one knows or considers likely from an instinctive feeling rather than conscious reasoning. So, intuition here is very similar to instinct according to that definition. But let's go back to this idea of conscious reasoning. That's really key. So when we talk about behaving in a way that has an evolutionary basis, it's removed from that conscious reasoning. But that doesn't mean that it's fixed or that everyone behaves in the same way, even in the same context. It doesn't mean that there's no room for experience and learning and so on. So intuitions, I think, are a way of shorthanding this idea that you are drawing upon a vast area of knowledge that you're making connections in a way that are personalized and that really stem from your individual past and behaviors, I don't think there's any reason to rule out that, those intuitions vary between people or that they're even accurate. But I think it's a mistake to think of intuitions as being something that's innate, that, we all have, and that it's fixed across our species. And I'm grateful for that question, actually, because I've never really thought about it. And I see many glasses of wine in my future with my sister debating that one. So thank you.
Yeah, I think so. The concept of an instinct as well, like the way people are quite happy to stick that label on certain behaviors, it reminds me of the caricature of evolutionary psychology at its worst, of like, oh, well, it's an evolved instinct. It's like,
right.
That's not an explanation.
Exactly.
And that's not what evolutionary psychology is either. Like, you get hypotheses, you test them. Sometimes they're wrong. You don't just go, oh, because we evolved like that. That's right. Not evolutionary psychology.
And in the heart of evolutionary psychology is really about the interactionist model, right? So it's genes working within an environment plus error and other things, but it's that interaction. And so to say instinct just diminishes that to just genetics, right? So absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't leave the room for cultural differences and like social norms and all of those things, which evolutionary psychologists do see as important. Mm-hmm, it's not a question of one or the other.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Our next question is from Anonymous, and they ask, how optimistic are you that gender roles are becoming more fluid and that parenting will be better for it?
I have to take a deep breath. That's a hard one. These are really good questions. So I should put on my other hat for a second. So I'm an evolutionary psychologist, but I've had over a decade of teaching gender roles, and I'm affiliated with the Kinsey Institute, which is, well known for its gender and sexuality research, and also work within the feminisms. So I'm an optimist at a personal level about gender roles changing. I'm a pessimist with the speed at which they're doing so. And I see huge variations among just even certain groups within a small community. So some parts of the community, pardon me, are much more dynamic in their gender beliefs and much more relaxed or flexible. And within the same city or same community, you have other individuals who are very steadfast and holding on to tradition. And I know that the progress has been slowly changing in Canada, at least. So to go back to the question, I do think that as gender roles change towards parenting, that things are going to improve. I really do. I'm a very liberal feminist, and I truly believe that children profit from having multiple influences in their lives. Sarah Hrdy shows that at least 3 is really mandatory for children to do well. But I don't know. I'm hoping, I'm optimistic, but I'm frustrated with the speed. And I see, fantastic fathering figures. I'm going to say men in general, but it's even more that father figures who step up to the plate, as it were, to really embrace being fathers at the cost of being judged for it. And there seems to be certain kinds of fathering that are more accepted, like, oh, I'm going to father in sports. I'm going to father in going to the car events. I'm going to father in these ways. But then when it comes down to the cuddling, the diapering, the feeding, and those sorts of things, those sorts of fathering activities tend to get more diminished or delegated towards women's spheres of influence. So I don't know. Am I allowed to say that? Is that fair?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know. It's always a good response.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Igor, and they ask, is a mother's behaviour affected in any way by hormones due to the recent childbirth? And if so, can it be considered some substitute for maternal instinct?
Yeah, that's a great question too, because absolutely, we know that oxytocin is really important, of course, at birth. And we know that stimulation of women's nipples causes oxytocin to increase. And by doing so, that promotes trust and feelings of bonding with children. We also know from adoption studies that were done that when women would hold their infants after birth and smell them or even touch them, their oxytocin would increase. and the probability of them giving the child up for adoption would dramatically decrease as a result. So I don't think it's perhaps a substitute, but I do think it's linked. And I actually, it's funny because I was going to cover it in the talk and I thought, oh, people are going to get too bored with everything, so I'll leave it. But it's funny because I was actually going to mention the interplay of hormones with ecology and context in terms of mothering behavior. So when we talk about the hormones and neurology of mothering, Sarah Hrdy, again, I know I keep saying her name, but she's really the primary figure in this area. But she was looking at how circumstances influence those parts of our biology. And so in 1999, and in 2003, she wrote about these situations in which mothers were forced into close proximity with their infants or not. So I'm going to read you part of my slide. I don't have it memorized because I kind of put it aside for a while, but so she's outlining a situation in the mid-19th century France, for example, at a charity hospital in Paris, where a forced subset of mothers remained in close proximity to their infants for 8 days, and that turned out to be rather important. Previously, 24% of mothers who had given birth at this hospital abandoned their babies, whereas the rate of abandonment dropped by more than half. And she's arguing that it's not only practice and conscious decision-making here that leads to that outcome, because there were mothers in poverty and things like that, but also the sensory and emotional experiences that were awoken by being close to the infant. So basically, by staying there for a few days, you have the hormonal parts coming into play, the neurological parts coming into play, and it's not maternal instinct, but it's the exposure that seemed to have awoken these things. And so what she says, quote unquote, is that fluctuating hormones do not determine behavior, but they alter the probabilities that certain behaviors will occur. And I absolutely love that, and I should have put it in retrospect, but it's such a beautiful way to highlight the ecological circumstance and how our biology is so intermeshed with that.
Yeah. Well, thankfully you got asked and now you were able to include it anyway.
It's true.
So our next question is from Maryanne, and they ask, do you think any parenting behaviour is separate from culture and social externals? For example, Cleo references snatched infants and their difficulties. Don't we just teach girls to be mothers?
Yeah, I don't think we teach girls to be mothers. I think we teach people how to parent and how not to parent. I do believe to that to some extent, but I'm an evolutionary psychologist, right? So, and we talked about the interaction cat, right? Like I fully believe in that model. So when you look at parenting behavior, and I included a reference to that, parenting is really about this genetic being within an ecology, right? So of course we're going to be influenced by our social cultural norms and the environments around us. But I think it's a mistake to say that parenting is entirely taught. Like you can see so many examples just in daily life where someone that was raised in a rather crummy situation. They had crummy role models as parenting. So if parenting was entirely taught, they should become crummy parents too, and often they don't. They sometimes do, but they often don't. And it's one of these situations where we have to look at why is it that they don't? Is it because they have learned what not to do? Or is it because there's something more in their biological context, right? Like who knows for that individual? But I don't think that's the case. But I think when we say there's a maternal instinct, we're putting a lot of pressure on moms and taking a lot of pressure off dads. And removing them. And I think that's a mistake. That's where I have an issue.
Yeah. And it's not just harmful for the mothers. It can be very harmful for the fathers as well.
Absolutely.
Like, I think there is still very much a bias when it comes to trying to get custody after a divorce.
Absolutely.
That women it's one of the few arenas where women are really advantaged. Mm-hmm. But it can be really damaging for the fathers in that situation as well. Absolutely.
And Canadian law reflects that. Yeah, absolutely.
Our next question is Gail from Glasgow. And they ask, is there evidence for women being more attached to offspring of planned as opposed to unplanned pregnancies?
I think this is a fantastic study idea. I don't think there has been any work on it, and I would love to do that. I don't know if I'm in a position where I can do that research. It's a little bit challenging from an ethical standpoint for us here, but that is a fantastic question and a fantastic follow-up idea. here's what I would speculate. This is, a situation I think we can be a little bit skeptical, but but if I was to speculate about it, I would say that planned pregnancies are probably going to show mothers who are in a situation where they have more resources, more support, they feel more confident, they might have better economic prospects, better jobs. I would guess the majority of women who are planning their pregnancies in that way feel supported, right? And so in which case, the work by Hurdy and the theoretical arguments would show that those are people you would expect that would have that deeper connection and more readily feel maternal love. If their situation changed, then perhaps you see the change in maternal love as well. But in terms of unplanned pregnancies, some of those mothers or mothers to be are going to also respond in a very positive way because they do have the social support. But there's going to be a segment, I think, that don't. And that's where we might see the concerning lack of maternal positive regard or maternal love for their children.
Yeah, it's certainly a really interesting area. Like, I know it's a discussion that I've got into with people a few times, that they talk about how strange it is that there are some women out there that don't want kids. Mm-hmm. And like, how does that work in the framework of evolution? It's like, well, because if the woman's heterosexual mm-hmm. and doesn't have access to contraception and has a lot of sex, she's mm-hmm. going to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. That desire isn't necessary for the procreation. Yes. So there's no reason why that desire needs to exist.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's not against evolution at all.
No, absolutely.
Our next question is another anonymous one. Mm-hmm. And they ask, can you love your children, but not particularly like them as individuals?
I think so. Again, I have no research to back this up, so this is me just throwing this out there, but I think so. And the reason why is because you can have, that the maternal bond and that maternal commitment at an emotional level to your child, right? Which is what, we're arguing maternal love really is about. But I don't think, being emotionally committed to them and attached to them means that you have to like the persons that they are, right? I don't think there's any necessity for that to be in place for you to make that commitment. You're making that commitment because your ecological situation is correct, or because you hope to get grandchildren one day maybe and skip over. I don't know, right? But I do think that maternal love can be independent of actually liking them as people. The other thing is I think when we talk about dependent youth, so, infants, newborns, into the early years, liking is fairly subjective and transitory, right? So you're going to wake up one day and they're going to be a different person, perhaps. I think when we start seeing parents saying they don't like their children, it tends to be when they're in teenage years, a little bit older and into adulthood. Those children are not as dependent, right? So it could also be related to maternal love being kind of related to that freedom and independence you see in later youth and adults. So something to consider. But yeah, I think it's possible.
Yeah. I think also just remembering myself from my own teenage years, sometimes teenagers are just awful people.
They can be.
They are just idiots. I think it's perfectly reasonable not to like them sometimes.
Oh, sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad. Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah. How did they not shoot me?
No. But you have to think about it from an adolescent point of view, too. Adolescence is a concept that, really came up around 1900s, right? So you went from being a child to being an adult. There was really no in between. And so, we've put this social construct of this in-between period on, and we've taken away a lot of independence, but at the same time, we want them to be independent. So I think adolescents actually have it fairly hard. I'm not justifying my 16-year-old me behavior, but we have all these expectations, you do everything on your own. We applaud toddlers, you do things on your own, and then they become adolescents, and we're like, no, you can't do all these things on your own now. And I know it's qualitatively different in many ways, but it has to be rough to be an adolescent. Thankfully, I've blocked some of that, but it has to be rough.
Yeah. I remember being a teenager being a very unpleasant time.
Yes.
But there's just so much going on. Our next question is another anonymous one. And they ask, how can we change opinions on single fatherhood? Thinking of a beautiful example of a single gentleman recently having a boy with the help of a surrogate mother.
Mm-hmm. That's got to be a hard situation, right? Because we have a discourse about being single mothers, and we have at least in Canada, we have a stereotype like being single mothers is hard. We applaud it all the time, and it's part of the whole gender roles concept, right? And the empowerment of being a single mom. We don't have that same discourse about being a single dad or being a single father. And usually we talk about it in terms of like the weekend dad, or, the dad that comes in and drifts back into the life of the kid for a bit and then goes away again. I think we have this, and I know this is a controversial statement, but these stereotypes are there for a reason, and it's to do with numbers, right? So, of course, we have more single mothers than we have single dads. We have more single fathers who drift in than we have single mothers who drift in and leave again. So in terms of changing opinions, I'm an educator, right? Like, I wouldn't be giving this talk unless I felt that I had something to say that might educate even one person about why saying maternal instinct's a bad idea. So if I was this person and they want to help change an opinion, start talking about that example, spread the news, right? And really try to promote it and bring out these great examples, because the more examples we have, the more of a discourse we have, right? And the more it seems like a common thing, and the further we'll be that way. Yeah. Sorry, that was my little preachy moment, but I'm a true believer.
Well, I enjoyed it. Our next question is another anonymous one. And they ask, do you think the idea of an instinct devalues mothers, e.g. single mothers? We assume they're just doing what's natural, whereas single fathers are elevated to hero status. That follows on quite well from the previous question. And do you feel that rings true as well?
I do think there's a default, like we have a default position that if a couple separates, for example, that the children, and this is even a legal default, that the children will fare better if they go with the mom. And so we have single motherhood as the norm. And I know that in many cases, at least legally, that is substantiated by a number of studies, right? So it's not a decision I'm sure that the legal system has taken into account lightly, but there is absolutely the hero status part of it. And it's because it's not a norm. And it seems self-sacrificing if a man takes, his children, or father takes his children into a single fatherhood situation. Where I get worried about it is that by saying something is exceptional and drawing a hero-like status to it, I understand the negativity as part of it, but we're not normalizing it, right? We're not talking about it in a way, again, like that part of the discourse, like we were just discussing. And I think by talking about examples where people are doing things that are in many ways normal, right? They're engaging in parenting behaviors. And I think by having more discussions like that, I think we will see the hero status diminish, right? And I think we won't see them, I call it the martyr syndrome, right? So we won't see the martyr syndrome quite so strong. But at the same time, we have to honor the fact that there is a wealth of literature that shows that, parents, single mothers versus single fathers, the children raised in those households might fare very differently. And again, it's something to think about. It's not a vacuum, right? So we have to think about the community and the society, the culture, the economics of the situation. And I think judges are of court cases in particular, are in a very hard position with that, because they have to think about this whole, huge influence. So I don't know. That's a rough one. Yeah. It's a really rough one.
Yeah. Okay, our next question is from Cleo, who is a Monkey World fan. And they'd like to know, what can you take from the fact that primates snatched as infants often don't know how to handle their own offspring?
Yeah, I don't know. The only connection I can give is a weak one, but it might shed a little bit of light, and that is some of the work that we were doing was looking at essentially who becomes an alloparent. So, for example, if you look at humans as cooperative breeders, you can talk about the fact that you have the mom, you have a maternal grandmother. It's usually maternal grandmother next, then the father of the child that contributes the most in terms of at least the hunter-gatherer data to raising a child, and that could be providing calories, it could be taking care of the children or infants and so on. We also were looking, though, about why non-kin might engage in childcare activity, for example. So why might your friends pitch in and help you out? Why might basically your friends engage in sort of these altruistic acts without any potential reciprocation down the road? And why would you trust, more than anything, why would you trust non-kin with your infant, right? And it's really, the literature is very scant, and they actually draw usually to bonobos and other great apes when they talk about it, but they talk about it in terms of the reason that you might allow non-kin to have any sort of ability to access your infant is so that they can do trial and error learning, right? So there's a lot of curiosity about the infant, but it's about this trial and error. So the only parallel I can draw into what the question was about was this idea that maybe it's to do with the fact that that offspring didn't have a chance to engage in that sort of alloparenting, trial and error learning in a trusted relationship context. But that's the best I can do in terms of an answer.
Yeah, it certainly adds evidence to the idea that mothering isn't an automatic instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose another example would be some of the research that Harry Harlow did with monkeys, where he separated baby infant monkeys from their mother to see whether it would form an attachment with like the fake warm cloth mother or a cold cage mother that fed it. And when those monkeys went on to be parents themselves, I mean, part of it could be that they were horribly traumatized.
Yes.
But they weren't good parents. But so if it was instinctual and unalterable, you would expect their history to not make any difference on the sort of parents they are.
Right. Absolutely.
Our next question is from Dominica. And they ask, isn't infanticide a pathology rather than evidence against maternal instinct? Could we say that there is no survival instinct since some people commit suicide?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the suicide part first. Excuse me. So I had the great fortune of doing some of my master's research with Dr. Dennis de Catanzaro at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. And he's probably the leading expert on suicide from an evolutionary point of view. And one of the things that he showed, he did this is going back now quite a ways, but he did a series of studies, and he went into a variety of different places like elder care facilities, very high security jails, just a wealth of different places, and tons of data, so thousands of interviewees. And what he was asking about was suicidal ideation. So these were people who obviously hadn't committed suicide because they were still responding, but he was asking about why they were thinking about it or why they had thought about it in the past. And the number one reason that he came up with was burdensomeness. So these are individuals who were in a position where they did not want to be a burden to those around them. Now, that has a very evolutionary logic to it, right? Because you don't want to deplete the resources of your kin or those that you love. And I say love here with a little bit of trepidation because evolutionary psychology, we don't talk about love that much, right? But there was this idea of removing themselves as a burden. And the people that were thinking about suicide in a way that might lead to the behavior were people who felt like they didn't have resources or who felt that there was a stigma attached to where they were located and so on. We have since gone ahead and done some study on suicide notes following up from that work. And it's, first of all, it's extremely hard to get those notes, as you can imagine. They're very sensitive. But we have been looking at the notes in terms of burdensomeness, and it's there. But I wouldn't, and this is not published data. We haven't, I don't think we've executed the study well enough to go to that point. But what we are finding is that there's a degree of sensationalism in the notes. So people saying, I did this because, I believe in this movement, or I'm against peanut butter, or like we get some really interesting random messages. But there is a fair amount of burdensomeness coming up. If that is true, then I say there's an evolutionary argument to be made for it. So going back to, isn't infanticide, pathology or something that's, shows that there's something wrong with an individual? I don't think so, because it seems to be contextually based. And when we look at who's committing infanticide, the situations in which they're in, what their future payoffs might be, the number of current children they have that they have to feed otherwise, it seems to be a very carefully made decision that does reflect some sort of evolutionary logic to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Rather deep and depressing, but there we go.
Well, but that's human nature. Sometimes we are just going to go to those places. We have another question from Maryanne, and they ask, are there any decent studies looking at single fathers and men in relationships with men who have children together that are suggestive of paternal instinct?
Great question. And honestly, there's two parts to this question. One is that, the evolutionary studies in general tend to be very heteronormative. And this, of course, is a big issue, and there is a slow redress of it. But in terms of the wider psychological literature looking at, say, situations of two fathers, or even a more polyamorous situation, not that I'm aware of, but tied to that is this idea of paternal instinct. I just want to pause there for a moment. It's separate, because there's no literature on paternal instinct that I'm aware of, at least not really informed research about it. And I'm not diminishing the importance of that question, but I'll give you an idea of how scant the literature is. So I'm sure most of the listeners that are still with us, I'm sure they've heard of the word of mummy judging, or the phrase mummy judging, or mum judging, or something like that. And if you pop that into Google, you'll get probably 2 million search reviews in a nanosecond, right? There's no literature on mummy judging. It's just a vast area of ignorance. So, when we have these major concepts that the popular ethos is talking about that don't appear in the literature, that's a problem. A paternal instinct is definitely one of those, but it's not alone. Yeah.
Okay. Our next question is another anonymous one. And they ask, I have autism. What others call instinct, I call thinking ahead, seeing various permutations and strategizing. How does autism impact motherhood strategizing?
Fabulous question. And I have no idea. But I would say that if we look at mothering as being a reflection of flexible decision making, then this should just be another way to build on that model. So it's a fantastic idea, but that would be about the limit of what I could speculate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our next one's a slightly more fun question, I guess. Potentially. It depends what your answer is, actually. They ask, it's another anonymous one, and they ask, why should anyone have children?
So if this was written by someone who's been up since 4 a.m. with their 3-year-old, I get you, is what I'm saying. I understand. I'm feeling that way myself. But, to be serious about it, of course, I'm an evolutionary psychologist, right? So my bottom line is thinking about how humans have adapted, and it's all about individual fitness, right? So it's all about, your genetic lineages. It's all about your genetic transmissions within a context. But why should anyone have children? I don't, honestly, there are some mornings I wake up after having 2 hours sleep, look at my partner, and I go, I don't know why we did this. So
our next question is another anonymous one. And they ask, as human babies are so helpless for so long and need so much help to reach reproductive age, there must be a whole host of instincts to allow this to happen. And this is the problem with the idea of an instinct, right? Like, how many instincts could our brain possibly contain? And we talk about instincts in terms of things like feeling jealous when someone cheats on you, or when we talk about language, we talk about language instinct, like Steven Pinker, and about how we have this acquisition device in our brains. The brain is prime real estate, right? Like, that is 25% of your metabolic cost roughly goes into your brain. So, I just have an issue with the idea of an instinct and the number of instincts to begin with. But absolutely, human babies are helpless for a much longer period than we see in any other mammal. And they're much more demanding of care. And I'm thinking about that. Why would anyone have children? Question still, but it's absolutely true. But I don't think we have to delegate it to instincts. I think we have to think about it in terms of all the adaptations we have that allow us to have dependent children. And I think we also have to take a page out of the book from what we call the Evo-Devo people, right? So the evolutionary developmental people who talk about children as having their own adaptations. So instead of it
instead of it being like a linear process from baby to child to adult in terms of evolutionary adaptations, or that children are mini adults, they have their own needs that they have adapted to and are seeking attention to solve, just like adults do. So I think it diminishes the question greatly in a way to frame it like that, but it's truly necessary to think about how children are independently evolved organisms that have their own needs to be met. But it's true, taking care of them is hard, and you need a lot of people, you need resources, you need support to really do it well.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you covered in your talk, that sometimes the need of the child will be in conflict of the need of the parent, or
Yes.
you'll get conflict between siblings because obviously each of them wants to put their own best interest, and
Absolutely.
yet by them both existing, they're splitting the amount of attention they're getting
Absolutely.
from the parents. So
yeah.
We have another anonymous question.
Okay.
So they ask, how do shows like Bad Mums contribute to the perpetuation of this natural role of women, plus being a superwoman to juggle it with the job and the gym?
So I'm not aware of the show. So having a 3-year-old, 5-year-old, also juggling a research career and a visual arts career and other things, I don't get a chance to watch a lot of TV. But what I will say is I think the bane of my existence are the advertisements for gyms where they show a new mom holding, I'm thinking about one particular billboard I saw not long ago. And the mom, supposed new mom, was holding an infant and had 4 other children, different sizes around her. And she was talking about how she's working hard on getting back her pre-mum bod, right? And there was a briefcase, I think, in the picture too, and all this other stuff. And I was just looking at that, and I was going, what an unfair, unrealistic expectation to put on to parents. You know, like you're devoting so much of your time and emotional well-being to this infant potentially. And then it made me think about, in what situation would you feel comfortable devoting that time elsewhere? Right. So are you in a condition where, you're really, really wealthy, you have a nanny who's fabulous, or a team of nannies, as the case may be, to take care of your children. And I realized that people parent in very different ways. Where I personally began to feel a bit enraged about that, though, was that, and I'm speaking as a mom now, not so much as an academic, but you only have little ones for so long. Right. And I think if you've decided to have children and you are embracing it to really get everything you can emotionally back from your children, I think it really robs that opportunity. Like when we put these expectations on about, I have to go to the gym, I have to go to work, I have to become a professor, I have to be like all these other roles you have. It takes so much away. And I had this woman on an airplane ride. I was actually on my way to a conference, and I had my children, or at that time, one child with me. I was giving a keynote, and I was trying to juggle the whole mom thing. And I remember her saying to me, because I really had to use a washroom, was the bottom line, and it was a long flight. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to do this. And she said, after about 4 hours into the flight, she said, "Your arms must be very tired. Would you like me to hold your child?" And I sized her up, and in a moment of desperation, I'm like, well, she can't run away, and she looked like a grandmotherly type. Anyway, I agreed for a minute, and I quickly went to the washroom, came back, and she said, it's really a shame people don't hold their babies anymore. And that was a comment that was made several years ago to me, and I thought about it, and I was like, you're right. Like, people are constantly putting children in buggies, or children in car seats, children in anything to hold them except their arms. And I know this is far removed from the question, but it made me really reevaluate the time I was spending with my children at that point. And so I made the personal decision to gain 25 pounds, stop going to the gym, tongue in cheek, but it's serious. Like I made a very conscious decision to not buy into that stereotype. And I know when my children are older, I'll have to deal with repercussions of being unhealthy and hopefully deal with that full on. But yeah, it's not fair.
Yeah. That is really interesting. It's never occurred to me before that the idea of having like a papoose so you can strap your child to you, or having buggies and all these things, it's although they can be very useful for allowing you to do other things while looking after your child, it also increases that expectation. It's like, well, you've got these gadgets, you can do other things while holding your child.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You're not just saying to an email, oh, I'm sorry, I can't respond right now, I'm holding my child. Like if you just had that as your automatic response, like how you would be viewed. And then even more so if you were a father, right? And you said that back. I'm sorry, I can't respond to your email, I'm holding my child.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
and they ask, would animal behaviour after birth of their young class as maternal instinct, i.e. licking them clean, being rough if unresponsive, and so on?
I would not say it's maternal instinct, but I would say it's a form of maternal love that's ecologically dependent. I'll give you an example. So when we talk about I teach an introduction to ethology course, and one of the things that we discuss as a class is being a social species means in some cases that you have young who do not immediately recognize who their parents are. And we specifically talk about situations involving olfaction. So, for example, sheep, we have lambing season, right? So you have lots of little lambs running around and you have the ewes around. How is it that, the ewes are going to be able to recognize their own lambs? And of course, one of the things they do right after birth is to lick, which is to scent mark their lambs. So, of course, there's been all sorts of nasty scientists who have come in and done experiments where they take lambs and they replace them right away. And if the scent is not there, there's a window of time where she'll accept the lamb, but then, of course, it's a no-go. So in terms of the question, it's really, again, I think this is ecologically dependent because it's about timing. I think it's also about the situation in which she has just given birth, right? So maternal instinct in the way most people conceptualize it, I don't think it works. I think it's really about maternal love or maternal commitment within a certain context.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Gray the Earthling.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask, does the idea of maternal instinct persist among people who don't see gender and sex as intrinsically linked?
Yeah, it's a good thought. So, first of all, I'd have to know how many people don't think gender and sex are intrinsically linked. And I'm very appreciative of those people. It's not that. But it's one of those questions of, if you ask people about their concepts about sex and their concepts of gender, then you have to ask, who doesn't have that bind, and then you have to ask about maternal instinct. So we just haven't done the work, is the bottom line. But I don't know. I think a better way of going about it would be asking people who view gender and sex as being distinct, or at least being open to the idea that gender is somehow removed from sex. Asking them about parenting behavior. So asking them attitudes about parenting and, can masculine women be as good a parent as a feminine woman? Those sorts of questions. As far as I know, it hasn't been done. I do know that we tend to look at aggressive women very negatively, but that would be about all I could really say.
Yeah. Okay. Another anonymous question is, how important is a mother role model from our own mother to be a good mother? Oh, mother of God, that's a lot of mothers.
Okay, I'm trying to catch
Should I ask that again?
So, okay, how important is
a mother role model from her own mother to be a good mother?
Got it, I think. Okay. So I'm just going to reduce this down as how important are mother role models on mothers. Okay, I'm just going to boil it down to that. Sorry, I'm lost in thought on that one for a minute because it's a really important concept. So if we look at it from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, when we think about the genes on the one side, that's fine. But let's talk about the interaction with now the family situation, with the culture, with the society. If you're in a situation where you're learning that parents are responsive and that caregivers will respond to your needs as they are demanded, or if you have parents who constantly provide positive support, those sorts of things, that, of course, all leads into attachment, right? So attachment theory proposes that especially the first 3 years of life, you get that critical working model in place. So what I would say is that, using attachment theory, I'm just thinking aloud here, using attachment theory as the backbone for that answer, you would have to say that role models of mothering are extremely important, right? Because they're going to show you via doing, right, whether it's worthwhile to invest in future relationships. So in terms then, that's the attachment theory literature. So now I'm going to tie that, I'm keeping up here. So now I'm going to tie that to your own abilities to mother. I think it would be paying it forward in that way that you're going to show your own children that, it's worthwhile to invest in people and have that secure attachment or insecure attachment if the role model is not a positive one, perhaps. So, yeah, that's interesting. I was just trying to keep up with the mothers there. That was a hard one.
Yeah. It was part question, part riddle. Okay, I think this is our final question of the evening.
Okay.
And David wants to know, where are your cats? We know you have cats.
I do. They have now left the living room area. So I have a soft heart for cats, and they are not currently here, so I'm not able to get them. The children, while we have been talking together, the children have been running around the background. We're doing potty training, which turns out to not be the best moment to engage in online anything. But the little one has been terrorizing the cats a little bit. He goes up and kisses them, which is cute, but it's also not exactly what they want when they're sleeping. But I'll tell you a funny story about the cats. So I have a long-haired tortoiseshell that was a homeless cat I took in named Hobo. And I have now a short-haired tortoiseshell cat, the tortie cat, that I call Freckles. So my partner made the mistake of going out for a bit, and my friend said, do you know anyone that would be interested in this cat? And this was the short hair. And I looked at the picture, and I was like, I wonder how long I could pass this off as the long hair before my partner would notice. But then I felt immensely guilty after I said, bring it, I'm happy to have another cat. I felt really guilty, so I told him just as he got home. But there was that moment where I was like, I wonder if I could get away with it for like a month, a year, But I'm happy I did, because now they actually stay in the same space. So, yeah.
That's a brilliant strategy. I might remember that for if I'm ever in a situation where I'm living with somebody who doesn't want me to have more than one cat.
Well, we have a big house. So I thought, by the time they occupy the same place, I would have told him. But yeah, anyways.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that tip, and thank you for an absolutely fantastic talk and Q&A. It's been wonderful having you with us.
Thank you.
Right, don't forget that next week we have Dr. Keith Can-Harris with us with his talk on the end of denialism. So please join us for that, and it's sure to be another excellent talk. And that's it for another week. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the team behind the scenes. Tonight we had David and Malcolm on tech, and Brian as my backup MC who helped sort through all the questions. We'll be opening the doors to our virtual pub, the Lock-ins Razor, via Zoom, and there should be links to the call in the chat. But if you can't see the link, it can also be found on our website, sitp.online. Thanks again, and see you soon.